You know, it's not easy to deliver the truth. I'm not on mute. Okay. Hi, everyone. Few little glitches to start the show. It's going to be a good one. Do you have your dark goggles for the eclipse? We're going to talk about good stuff. Not easy to deliver. Okay. Hello. All right, we're sorry about that, but we're here and it's gonna be incredible. Okay, stay with us. You know, I love to start the show by reading from my dad's Bible, and I just opened it up today, and you know, all these amazing things are happening in the next few days in the heavens. Like five planets are lined up. We've got an incredible solar eclipse. You know, I think it all points to the amazingness of God. I remember being at a, I went, I think, to the planetarium, the Macmillan Bloedel building here in Vancouver area once, and I was watching a presentation, and the scientist who studies the heavens, he was pointing us to a couple of, there are a couple of, they weren't planets, but what they were items that they knew were in the sky that were going the opposite way of the way that all of the, you know, most of the planets will turn in the same way. And he was pointing to the fact that some were going in the opposite. And I put my hand up and I said, what is your explanation for those that are, you know, going in the opposite way? And he's like, you know, I have no idea. And I had a good answer. I didn't say it out loud at the time, but in my heart I knew, because God made it that way. He made the heavens. He made everything that we see. So I opened my dad's Bible, this 50-year-old plus Bible, leather bound, all of these incredible things that my dad has underlined. And in Psalms 33, verse 6, it says, by the word of the Lord were the heavens made, and all the host of them by the breath of his mouth. Isn't it cool? Like, God always gives me the coolest verses from my dad's Bible to start the show. So take a look here at the solar eclipse 2024. Before we get to our incredible guest today, we're going to have a really good discussion. But everything that you need to know for April 8th, timing, path of totality, safety, warnings, and more. Safety, I read an article about people who never had the same vision again when they took a chance and they stared at an eclipse. You don't do that. It's very, like, have respect for the power of that sun, and make sure that if you want to see that eclipse, that you do yourself a favor and get out and get those dark glasses, okay? So we are going to have a celestial treat, Yahoo calls it, as a total solar eclipse will plunge a swath of the continent into minutes of darkness for millions of people, from the southern reaches of Mexico to the northeastern borders of Canada. And this got me thinking that I don't think we might not see the eclipse here in British Columbia over on the West Coast. And I'm kind of sad about that. I do know somebody who watches us faithfully, Mary Lou. She told me that in the eastern parts of Canada, over at Niagara, the hotel rooms have gone up from $1,000 to $4,000 per night. They're usually about $400 a night. So they're getting a nice kickback off of all of this. But JT, if you'll just go back here. So this solar eclipse is going to happen just at the right moment. The moon passes between the sun and the earth, according to NASA, and we know this. There are several types of solar eclipses, partial, annular, and total. And what makes the 2024 eclipse significant is the celestial event. This celestial event is a total solar eclipse, meaning the moon, for those in the path of totality, will completely block all sunlight for several minutes. How amazing. You know, I think there's not another one of these for something like 17 to 20 years. So this is epic, you know. Make sure that if you can see it, it will be moving at 2,000 miles an hour by the time it reaches Canada. This is the shadow. It moves at 2,000 miles an hour. The moon will begin transiting in front of the sun approximately an hour before totality and will end an hour after totality. So in Canada, the partial eclipse will begin around 2:07 p.m. Eastern Standard, EDT. What is that? Eastern Daylight Time. When it enters Canada's border in southern Ontario, so I call that EST. Yes, I don't know why it's EDT, but anyways, what does Yahoo know, right? And those located on the northeast Canadian portion of the path can expect the sun's light to begin dimming at approximately 4 p.m. So where will it be visible in Canada? Okay, let's have a look. Do you see this? Canadian provinces in the path of totality include Ontario, Quebec, New Brunswick, Newfoundland, British Columbia. It happens once in like so many years, and I'm on the wrong side. How fast can I get over to Ontario? No, I'm just kidding. I can't do it. All right. So very cool. Look at all these. These are, if you're in any of these cities right here, make sure that you are out there. Don't miss it. There's wonders in the heavens, and God created an incredible world. All right, we'll talk about a bit of Canadian politics a little bit later. There's some things going on with the Liberal corruption. Of course, we know that they're a corrupt party. It's very evident, but it's kind of sad. I saw Liberal MP Han Dong. Was he the one that was breaking down and crying yesterday? Yeah, I mean, this has broken the man. He's very humiliated, and it looks like they bust in a bunch of people. So, you know, to get his nomination. I mean, we just can't cheat. Like, we have to really, you know, let's be a country where we do the right thing. And we know there's been all kinds of cheating. Do you remember? So this was actually for the Liberal to be an MP, right? And then there's the Liberal Leadership Convention, and they get the right guy in there. And then there's the Conservatives, the Conservative Party of Canada. And do you remember when Andrew Scheer went up against Maxime Bernier? This was spoken of for weeks. And basically, Deloitte and Touche was the auditors. And that night that Andrew Scheer won the leadership of the CPC. Well-known fact, however, few seem to remember this or know about it in the Conservative Party. But there was a problem because there was over 4,000 too many votes that were cast as were entitled to vote for the leadership. How might that happen? And it's my understanding they were using machines. So something went very horribly wrong, and the margins were like 49 to 51. So Andrew Scheer wins by 51. Maxime Bernier loses the leadership. And in fact, Stephen Harper had believed that he was going to be taking the leadership, and they'd had a conversation. And lo and behold, Maxime said that, you know, he was going to put his own people into the positions at the office there. It looked like he was going to win. And then that night, over 4,000 votes cast that weren't on the ballot, that weren't eligible. So interesting, right? Yeah, that's all right. Let's let bygones be bygones. Let's hope that we get some good governance in this country. I'm believing for that. Are you? I'm praying for it. All right. So let me introduce our guest today. This is a fascinating topic, and I've been very, very outspoken about my faith, my personal beliefs, and also I've been on a real quest because of friends that I have here in Canada, you know, where I want to research and know the truth about my religion, the truth about other religions, and also, you know, the events that we've seen in the world and what the Bible has to say about Israel and such. And so this has been an intriguing time since October 7th, everything that has taken place. But we've invited Andrew G. Bostom. He's an American author. He's a medical doctor and a critic of Islam. He's retired. He is a retired associate professor of medicine at Brown University Medical School. Bostom, he's written 5 books, and he's also written historic works such as The Legacy of Jihad and The Legacy of Islamic Antisemitism. And he's also been noted for his criticisms of COVID-19 vaccinations and also the public health establishment's narrative about what has taken place in the last 4 years. So with that said, Dr. Andrew Bostom, welcome to the show. Thank you for being with us today. We appreciate you coming to us from somewhere like way over on the other side of the world in the United States there.
Thanks, Laura. Yes, where we will be able to see the eclipse.
Yes, you will. Yeah, you're very blessed, and I hope you get out there. I think your wife's already got her glasses, right? So be sure you get yours. Good.
Although actually, we'll be in Texas by the time that happens. So visiting our daughter. So I don't know how you like.
Yes. Well, when I look at this kind of world map here, JT, if you look down here, I think that that almost to me, tell me, does that look to you like that goes through Texas, the path? I think Texas is sort of like right in here.
Yep. We might get some of it.
Yeah.
I might be able to see it.
Yeah, I hope you do. Yeah, I hope you do. That's fantastic. Okay, so we've been watching some things happening and considering the topic today and the things that you speak about. We've had a lot of people coming into the United States, even up through those borders. So maybe I wanted to just ask you personally how you're feeling about the United States and all that's going on with this invasion, well over 3 million people in a very short period of time. And so what are you feeling about that and what's going on with Biden?
Oh, it's been a disaster. It's been an absolute disaster. Look, I look at 2020 as essentially as if we had a coup. I mean, it began, I would say, towards the end of the 2016 campaign, lasted throughout President Trump's presidency, and then culminated. I mean, you talk about some of the election abnormalities that that you witnessed in Canada. I think they may pale in comparison to what happened here. And I mean, I'm going on 68 now. I've watched elections in real time since the 1968 election, and I saw things I'd never seen before. In terms of counts, I never saw, just on the most simplistic level, I never saw anyone's count drop. I saw that happen on my own television. It's just bizarre things, and I don't want to go through the whole how it's all been litigated, but look, it's very clear what was going on throughout Trump's presidency. There is, in fact, a deep state. There's tremendous infiltration of the U.S. government by both the very hard left, I would say, Marxists, and jihadists as well. And it's the country is teetering in the balance. So I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, and I did see, as a matter of just watching, that they wanted to promote and put forward a judge just under the Supreme Court. The Democrats had put forward a Mr. Abdullah or something, and it looks like,
Angie or NG is the last name.
Yes.
And I mean, except the Democratic Party has basically become a socialist party by and large, but he had such blatant anti-Semitic associations that I think even at least two Democratic senators now are refusing to vote for him. So I think his nomination to the bench will be blocked. But it was pretty close.
Yes, I saw one of your outspoken senators. His name escapes me, but he's that older guy, and he just went after the climate guy too. Kennedy, yeah.
Oh, Kennedy,
Senator.
yeah. John Kennedy from Louisiana, yeah.
Yeah, he always gives me a laugh. He's just fantastic.
Right.
So I saw him questioning the gentleman, and clearly he was on the They basically, he was part of organizations that were clearly anti-Semitic, and so problematic for sure. Tell me a little bit then about how you went from being a doctor and to being a critic of Islam, and what ignited this interest to you, and what have you found out?
Well, I didn't really start out being a critic of Islam. I just wanted to, after 9/11, my wife and I both grew up in New York and still have, and certainly at the time of 9/11 had family in New York, and I was just shocked, and a lot of what I was seeing right off the bat sounded just overly apologetic to me, and I just began to read, take advantage of this great university library system I had, academic faculty, and it just got it. I got into it in a way that I never imagined, and wound up being encouraged. I started to write short essays and wound up being encouraged by scholars in the field, not in medicine, but in Middle East studies, to consider writing books about the subject. And the first book I wrote was The Legacy of Jihad, again because of 9/11. But as I was finishing up that book, I came across some documentary sources from the Indian subcontinent. There was jihad invasions of the Indian subcontinent, and they were amongst the most brutal and the most bloody. And I was reading some of the polemical Muslim clerics' writings of one of them in particular, who was a Sufi, and we're all taught that Sufism is contemplative and benign, but actually there are those aspects, but in terms of the law, in terms of Islamic law, they are just as traditional, and in this case, preaching jihad violence as non-Sufis. So I understood the tract that I was reading in terms of the waging jihad against the indigenous Hindus, but in the middle of this anti-Hindu tract was a line, and this was the Sufi cleric was named Sirhindi. He died in 1624. It said, "Whenever a Jew is killed, it is for the benefit of Islam," and it just leaped out at me, and I just, it sort of set me on a different course. I was actually, after I finished my first book, I was thinking of just focusing on the non-Muslim minorities in Asia and the impact of jihad on them, because I had done a sort of a broad canvas. And I said, I want to understand that there has to be some theology that elicits a remark like that, and that's really what set me on the path to investigate what the theological sources were for that, and that led me into not only the theology but also the history. A lot of it neglected. Now, I will say that the Jews were a small minority, so in terms of the scope of suffering that jihad imposed upon the populations that were conquered, theirs was smaller, in some cases relatively minor, compared to the depredations faced by Christians, certainly, by animists, by Hindus, by Buddhists, etc. But they suffered, and I found that history was largely concealed, whitewashed, romanticized. You always hear about the idyllic relations between Muslims and Jews and Christians as well in Muslim Spain, and this is all mythology when you actually study the history, and you can see it both. It's interesting, Laura. You can see it in the very triumphal accounts of the Muslim historians who basically celebrate the carnage and the conquest, and then the very poignant testimonies of the victims across all religions and ethnic groups. And when you put that mosaic together, it's not a happy picture.
I think what's difficult about the age that we're in is that, like even in Canada, there's a very political correct culture, and we're taught, like, don't be racist, and if you say anything against Islam or the religion of Islam, that you're potentially a racist, and so people are very leery.
Laura, the specific word is an Islamophobe, and it's actually an interesting word.
Sure.
Because I think of Islamophobia in terms of, again, having studied the jurists and having studied the original texts that Muslims rely upon, the Quran itself and the traditions of Muhammad. And Islamophobia, if you look at it objectively, is actually a doctrine. It's an Islamic doctrine. In other words, the Muhammad says, "I have been made victorious through terror." And in the Quran, there are invocations, particularly in the 8th surah chapter, to striking terror in the heart of the infidels. And it's so it has that level, which is frightening, but it also has a logic to it. The logic is, and this is elaborated by the jurists, is that if you terrorize these non-Muslim populations that the Muslims are preying upon to conquer and submit, then you will spare certainly the Muslim jihadists casualties, but actually you will spare the infidels that they're attempting to subdue casualties, because they'll just submit. I mean, so I don't think that's particularly acceptable, but there is a logic to it. So it's very ironic to me to have this made up notion of Islamophobia, like Judeophobia, Christianophobia, etc., as to irrational hatred and fear of Muslims, when you think about this doctrine of imposing terror on the infidel to get them to submit, which is actually a doctrine. There's all these ironies.
That is ironic. I hear what you're saying. And I guess what it does is it causes people maybe not to investigate what our true concern should be, what we need to worry about and be concerned, and what we don't need to be concerned about. And then what is our response as Christians? It is concerning, as I have watched the rise with the pro-Palestinian marches that have gone on all through Canada and the United States. And I've also considered the number of people that have been coming into our country from these places that might not respect our God, our religion in North America, our
Christianity.
Yeah.
Or the law. It's both religious disregard and secular law disregard. I mean, so in other words, the Sharia is an all-encompassing system, Islam law, and it has always sought and continues to seek to replace all other systems, whether they're other religious systems or other political systems, etc., because it sees itself as a complete sort of religio-political system and the perfect system. So why should these systems be allowed to be in place when, we have the answer, and the answer is Islam and Islamic law?
Right. And we've had factions even here in Canada that have wanted to put in Sharia law, and thankfully, it's been rejected. But I'm kind of concerned that there's like this acceptance or sleepiness regarding perhaps how dangerous what's happening right now really could be. Someone sent me a dream that they had this last week. She's rather a prophetic person from the United States, and she just sent me a dream, and she said it really scared her. And she said she saw gas stations with Arabic people there. They were protecting the gas stations, and everybody somehow, all of them, they were just coming in. They all knew to be there, and they were like a team, and they had assembled, and they were in harmony and knew what they were doing. And so she was conveying this to me, and the concern being that something is going on, and I guess it's playing on her subconscious, or perhaps it's a warning from the Lord. But we're seeing that there's not a regard for our laws. It seems there is, at times you can get a sense that they have a superior way and a superior law. And if indeed a jihad, and you one of your books is named after this, but if there is a jihad, they will all come into alignment and do what they're told to do.
Well, yeah, that's one of the interesting things about, if you just look, in the last 6 months at how we've evolved from the horrific events of October 7th to where we are now. So October 7th happens, and horrific. Well, it was a horrific intelligence failure on Israel's part, and Israel's had a history of intelligence failures. I mean, honestly, the 1973 Yom Kippur War, it was worse, believe it or not, where whole armies were moving and Israel was caught unawares. I mean, this was horrific in terms of the brutality of the attacks, the pure targeting of non-combatants, and their murder, their mutilation, their rape, their burning. I mean, it was horrific. But shortly after, you have to look at how the major Islamic institutions react. Let alone the Muslim masses. I'll get to that. But Al-Azhar University is in Cairo, at least since the time of Solid, so towards the end of the 12th century, has been the major Sunni Islamic teaching institution, religious teaching institution. So remember, about 90% of Muslims are Sunnis, about 10% are Shiites. Al-Azhar University, for 800 plus years, has been the major religious teaching institution. And within a day or two of that horrific attack, they were about it as heroic resistance by Hamas, ignoring the carnage that had been wrought in Israel. By October 18th, 19th, Al-Azhar University issues a fatwa, a religious edict, declaring that all the lives of Israelis, not just the IDF soldiers, all Israelis are legitimate targets of jihad. And the point I want to make about this, by the way, Al-Qaeda, the remnants of Al-Qaeda, celebrated that religious edict, as you might expect. But the real tragedy to me is that there is no reaction to this. There's no reaction to this from religious and political leaders across the world. They don't know about it. They ignore it, and it allows this, what is unacceptable. Can you imagine? Pope Francis, if Pope Francis had issued a papal bull that said that they're reviving the Crusades, and the heck with the Jews and the Muslims, in the Holy Land, they want to reclaim it, and we're sending out, forces from wherever to invade and conquer and slaughter and pillage until we succeed. I mean, of course, it's unfathomable that something like that would happen. But this happens from Al-Azhar University, basically the Sunni Vatican equivalent, and it largely passes unnoticed and certainly not commented upon in a negative way. And I think this is the crux of the issue for me. And this is what I've learned, through bitter experience over the last 20 plus years, is that there's a huge problem with normative mainstream institutional Islam that very few people want to discuss, let alone criticize.
Wow. And why do you think it is? Are they ignorant? Are they afraid? Are we all just too busy with our own lives?
All of the above, Laura. Mm-hmm. All of the above, and it's very toxic, and it's not going to get better. And as a Jew, I feel these things acutely, especially since October 7th. But it's very clear. I mean, it comes from, or it's believed to come from, Muslim Brotherhood types in the Middle East. But it was around, at least since the 1930s, the notion that first we kill the Saturday people, then we kill the Sunday people. So it's not going to be limited, nor has it ever been limited, to Jews. Like I said, historically, Jews were always a small minority. I think in terms of deaths and destruction, etc., Jews actually suffered less from jihad as an institution, since the 7th century than all these non-Jewish populations that were conquered and submitted by the jihad, by Islam. So yeah, I mean, that to me, that's pretty obvious. But there is this real theological animus towards the Jews, and I think that's why you see it so acutely, so dramatically in the in the jihad against the Jews of Israel in particular.
Do you think that, well, let me ask you this about your books. Do you kind of go into how Islam started? Because there's a lot of confusion in people's minds where they kind of think that Muhammad, they don't understand that it was really hundreds of years after Jesus that he actually came up on the scene. And then my Muslim friends don't want to see him as having had a track record of violence. There's a rewriting of what I think is out there, the truth about him.
Yeah, well, I mean, Muhammad, and proudly so, was the prototype jihadist. Muhammad moves in his career, and again, remember, this is all, Laura, the Muslim narrative. There's really no independent confirmation, and there's actually raging controversy about the actual existence of Muhammad. Or is Muhammad, as we've come to know him, a composite of other warlords, etc. But be that as it may, we rely upon the Muslim description of Muhammad, and reading the traditions of Muhammad, so basically the accounts of the earliest Muslim community, reading the earliest sacralized Muslim biographies of Muhammad, the picture is very dark. He does start out as a proselytizer, but he moves on to becoming a political leader and a military leader, and a very cunning and brutal one. Again, this is all according to the Muslim narrative. And what's interesting, Laura, is that again, according to the Muslim narrative, Muhammad is born around AD 570, and gets his first so-called Quranic revelation around 610. But the Muslim calendar, oddly, does not begin until 622. Well, what happens in 622? That's the last 10 years of Muhammad's life, where he moves from being a proselytizer, he moves to being a political military leader and conqueror. And I find that absolutely fascinating, which shows you the melding of religion and politics and military campaigns all together. And so there's and I'm not saying, if you look at Muhammad as a military leader, we wouldn't consider him to be, particularly evil or anything like that. I mean, these were the way struggles were waged in that time period. They were brutal. Massacre, pillage, enslavement, etc. That's the way it was.
Everyone was doing it, you're saying.
Exactly. So, but when that is integral to a religion, it gives it a whole different color.
So people say that Islam, it's a religion of peace. What do you say to that?
It is in this sense. It is, the goal is a pax Islamica, where, in other words, where the world is submitted to Islam. Then it'll be peaceful. Until then, not so much.
All right. Right. So those that are here in North America, let's use that. Many who've kind of come here since being children, or they've been here for a while, they will want to say, we're peaceful, we love, and we just we honor Jesus, and Jesus, we believe Jesus is the Messiah. Is what they say? Yeah.
A couple of things. First of all, there are Muslims that have left, the Middle East, North Africa, Iran, even Turkey now, that don't want any part of the Sharia, that want to integrate into Canadian society, American society, but it's the environment for them within their own communities is not really fertile for that, because the communities are very traditional. And again, and I mean traditional in a sense of what I'm just describing. And you can see it in the mosque sermons. You can see a lot of it in this response since October 7th. The Middle East Media Research Institute has, for about 30 years now, they started out just looking and publicizing mosque sermons and speeches by Islamic religious and political leaders in the Middle East, but they cover North America now too, and they certainly have since 9/11. And since October 7th, they have chronicled dozens and dozens of the most inflammatory, jihad promoting, Jew hatred promoting sermons and speeches at Islamic centers and mosques. And not a single one. And they look for reformers too. They're not just doing this to, sully Islam. They look for reformers too, and they find them. They have found them in the Middle East. They have found them, occasionally in North America. But what they have found since October 7th is they can't find a single mainstream mosque, Islamic center, condemning the atrocities of October 7th. Not one. And like I said, dozens of sermons that are just, they drip with hatred and jihadism. I think it's a difficult environment, unfortunately, now for Muslims in the diaspora, outside of the heartlands, which some of them wanted to get away from, and maybe practice some form of New Age Islam or whatever they wanted to do. But I don't think there's reasonable avenues for that anymore in either the United States or Canada, and that's tragic. But again, it's another one of these things, Laura, that I certainly see it in the Jewish community. The Anti-Defamation League, which has its own problems, it's basically been co-opted by the left, but they actually do a good job of monitoring anti-Semitism. In fact, they do an excellent job of surveying it. I think it was in the 1960s, they developed a very simple survey instrument where what they do is they take 11 anti-Semitic stereotypes, classical ones, modern ones, and they ask the respondents simply, how many of these do you agree with? And if you agree with 6 out of 11 or more, so the majority of them, you get appropriately classified as an index case of extreme anti-Semitism. And I would say over the last 20 years, since there's been enough Muslims outside of the Muslim societies to survey in the United States, certainly in Western Europe, you find that the anti-Semitic attitudes of the Middle East, which ADL has chronicled quite well over the years, are now occurring in Europe and the United States. So, for example, when you look at the Middle East and North Africa using this survey instrument, the 16, and then you compare it to the rest of the world, the 16 most anti-Semitic countries in the world are all in the Middle East and North Africa. And the prevalence, the commonality of this degree of anti-Semitism, again, it's extreme anti-Semitism, is anywhere from 74 to 93%. To show you how bad it's getting, the last survey where ADL reported the data with Muslim subpopulations, for example, in France, was just published last May, and it covered through the year, through 2022. That percentage had gone up to 62% in French Muslims. So it was almost approaching these horrific levels in the Middle East. And Europe has its own history of anti-Semitism from medieval Christianity, et cetera. But comparing Christians in Europe to Muslims in France, so in France specifically, it was I believe it was 15% amongst Christians, 62% amongst Muslims. And what is astounding is that the ADL collects all these data and then starts talking about, white supremacism. I mean, it's as if they have cognitive dissonance about their own data. And so, I feel very ambivalent about these survey data, because they're doing a service. They're showing that we're literally living with a pandemic of Muslim anti-Semitism, and yet they don't want to talk about it. It's just astounding.
Wow. I think that where it became really clear to me that we've got a really big divide and a big problem that was highlighted by what happened October 7th is that the moderate Muslims, people we would consider are pro-Canadian, call themselves Canadian, been here a long time, that they cannot label Hamas or Hezbollah as terrorists. And right. I was shocked by that. I thought, you've been here long enough. You're not even Palestinian. You don't even want the Palestinians in your country. Like countries of Lebanon, Syria, Egypt, Jordan, they all reject the Palestinians. But they will not put down Hamas after what happened October 7th. And it was like, you know, it just woke me up. Like they can't seem to separate themselves from their own religion, no matter how evil or what's happened.
Yeah, Laura, it's a top-down, bottoms-up phenomenon. So at the top, you have institutions like Alazar University, which preach the most unfiltered, virulent Jew hatred. I mean, their grand imams grand imams of Alazar are like the papal equivalent. Wow. Their last two grand imams are just raging anti-Semites. Now, raging anti-Semites in a very traditionalist way, using the anti-Semitic themes, particularly from the Quran, but anti-Semites nonetheless. And the same thing from the Shiites, not just, the Khomeiniist tradition, the so-called radical Iranian tradition. No, from the mainstream Shiite tradition, from the seminaries of Qom, etc., in Iran, which are considered to be more, quiet. But so this is what I'm talking about, is that it's coming from the major teaching institutions, unfiltered, unchallenged, and then it circulates from the bottom up at local mosques. The same themes. You will hear the same themes from the most prestigious religious institutions, and then down at the local level at mosques, repeating the same themes over and over and over again. And you talk about this idea, especially comes up around Christmas time, of course, about how Muslims revere Jesus. I mean, any Christian that just understands the basics of Islam should understand how absurd that is. And it applies to all the personages in the Old Testament and the New Testament. I mean, Islam is the ultimate, in terms of Abrahamic faiths, a monotheistic faith, is the ultimate supersessionist religion. In the Quran, it talks about, in the third surah, the 67th verse, it talks about Abraham was neither a Jew nor a Christian. He was a Muslim. And what it means is that despite historically, obviously, Islam coming after both Judaism and Christianity, in the Muslim understanding and Islam's understanding of itself, it was always the primordial monotheism. And Jews and Christians that understood their faith appropriately would have seen that and would have followed Muhammad and basically converted to Islam. When it comes to Jesus, Isa, really, it's not Jesus, it's Isa, the Muslim Jesus, is a Muslim prophet, like all the other prophets. And in fact, they deny the Trinity, they deny the crucifixion. So what happened to Jesus? Well, if you look at the fourth surah, Jesus, the perfidious Jews, and that's how they're identified in both the Quran and the traditions, brought the Romans to kill Isa, but Allah sucked Isa out of his abode and brought him up to, he's not, God forbid, he's not getting virgins, or he's just waiting. He's waiting in abeyance for 40 years or something before the end of times. Then he'll come back and reveal himself to be a full-throated Muslim. And in Hadith, it says he'll break the cross, kill the pig, and end the payment of the jizya. So he'll come back as a full-throated, Muslim jihadist, and those Christians that won't convert to Islam, he'll slaughter. So I don't think that that's the kind of picture that any believing Christian would say, oh, yes, that's exactly the Jesus.
That's exactly what we think too.
Yeah. Like, you guys got it exactly right.
Yeah.
It's absurd. It's just absurd.
And I guess they like to go back to Abraham, I guess being from, Esau, Jacob and Esau, or Isaac, and also the Ishmael, right? Isaac and Ishmael is actually
You know
they
what,
go
Laura?
back there, but yeah,
It doesn't matter. It's like I said, it's more supersessionist than that.
right.
Think of Shakespeare. We're all Muslims on a Muslim stage. Essentially, is what we're being told.
Yeah.
Whether we know it or not. So no, it's the ultimate form of supersessionism, and that those Jews and those Christians who actually understood their own texts would have seen the foreshadowing of Muhammad and would have followed him. And there's so many ironies. I mean, in the Muslim texts, they do acknowledge how few Jews followed Muhammad. It's a point of anger and contention, but they do acknowledge that. And there's a verse in the Quran that talks about the referring to the Jews. After it comes right after a verse condemning them as corrupters and prophet killers, etc. It's in the third surah. The 113th verse then says, the 112th verse talks about killing prophets and corrupting, etc. The 113th verse in the third surah talks about not all Jews. And who are the Jews that didn't behave that way? The handful that converted to Islam.
So if they see themselves sort of in a superior way, what danger is it as we embrace many Muslims coming to North America? Is there a danger? We've heard about sleeper cells. Do you think that there's a danger that they are, because from what I understand, they want to take the world and all of the infidels, and we can have a chance to become Muslims or not. But what do you see as the real world danger of the way that we are operating and our governments are just letting them into our countries?
Well, there's no vetting. I mean, that's the basic problem, especially now with our complete absence of a border, and Canada has pretty lax immigration policies.
Yeah.
Like I said, I mean, I think there are Muslims that want to get out of some of these theocratic totalitarian societies, and just, I don't know, be cultural Muslims, whatever you want to call it, or God, heaven forbid for them, it's very dangerous, actually apostatize. I mean, because that's still a death sentence. But there are people like that just want to abandon the faith.
Mm-hmm.
And how do we distinguish those people and from those that, well, obviously, if they have connections to terror, they that, I don't know.
That's easy. Yeah.
It's so crazy, they shouldn't be let in. But then there's a large group that would see a pathway to sort of a peaceful conquest or a peaceful means of just Islamizing the society, and that's a much more. By the way, they're much more numerous, but that's also creates a real dilemma for open societies. It's very difficult to handle that situation because they're not overtly attacking institutions, being part of terror cells, etc. On the other hand, their goal is not to adapt, but to transform.
And I've heard, though, that there's a growing number of Muslims converting to Christianity, and that it's an actual very fast-growing underground church in places where it could cost them their lives.
Iran in particular. I know a pastor from Australia that's been following this phenomenon and encouraging it. So there are countervailing forces. But again, another one of these ironies is that a lot of these people, even though the act of converting to Christianity or just saying that they no longer profess Islam and haven't really decided if they want to follow any religion, that is fraught with danger for Muslims to do that in a Muslim society. You would think that people like that, again, whether they just apostatize from Islam and are currently, in limbo, or whether they've converted to Christianity, you would think that those people would be treated as true refugees, knowing how dangerous it is for them in those societies. No, they often have the most difficult time getting refugee status. It's sick.
If we want to bring in all of these people to to North America, because, we say, that we need it for the workforce, or, we can help and have humanitarian reasons. But you're right, like in accepting Christians that are actually fleeing for their lives, that would be one really great group to be helping.
I mean, you would think that that's what the refugee laws were designed for, not to let in their persecutors.
Right.
And it just doesn't seem to work that way.
Yes. Wow. And so in your understanding of the Quran then, is the Quran, is it basically still teaching everyone that, this is like Islam is the only way, and infidels basically can be harmed if needed?
It's a very militant book. I'll put it to you that way. So how it's also very confusing and at times contradictory to read it. The Quran does not have a structure. It's a narrative structure like the Bible. It literally, the basic underlying principle for the Quran, with one exception, which I'll discuss, is basically longest to shortest. In other words, longest chapters or surahs to shortest. So it's got 114 surahs or chapters. Chapters 2 to 114, with minor variation, are essentially the longest chapters to the shortest. The one exception is the opening chapter, which is called the opening, the Fatiha. And that is a very, very short chapter, Surah 1, of 7 verses. And the first 6 verses are, pretty banal. They're just sort of a tribute to Allah and his alleged beneficence and mercy. But right there in the 7th verse, in the opening surah of the Quran, and remember, the Fatiha is used both as an introduction and as a way to sort of break up the 5 prayer sessions. So the Fatiha for pious Muslims is repeated about 17 times a day. If you're a pious Muslim and pray 5 times a day. And that 7th verse, again, also as part of the Fatiha, gets repeated 17 times a day. That verse, after praise to Allah, etc., and his beneficence and mercy, talks about that Muslims must follow the straight path, i.e. Islam, not the path of those who've engendered Allah's anger, the Jews, or those who've gone astray, the Christians. Now, it doesn't, in the text itself, it doesn't say the Jews have engendered Allah's anger, the Christians have gone astray. How do we know this? We know those references because Muhammad, in a tradition, makes it clear that it's the Jews in that verse that have engendered Allah's anger. It's the Christians who've gone astray. And then we've got about 13 centuries of Quranic commentaries now from the great Quranic commentators of Islam, where about 90% of them include that interpretation, including the modern Quranic commentaries that are still being taught now. I mean, they're all actually still taught at some level or another, but the most modern, important Quranic commentators, 90% of them have that interpretation. So can you imagine what kind of an indoctrination that is, 17 times a day, to hear even just that one verse, if you're a pious Muslim. And of course, that verse is tied into many other verses in the Quran, which transmit very negative attitudes towards non-Muslims, Jews and others. And then there's an entire chapter, which is supposedly the last chapter, quote unquote, revealed to Muhammad, Surah 9. Again, because chronology has nothing to do with numerical order. It's Surah 9, not Surah 114. That is entirely dedicated to jihad against Muslims and Christians, named specifically against so-called pagans, which certainly would refer to animists and Buddhists and Hindus. And these are open-ended war proclamations.
I watched with great interest and something I deeply respect about President Netanyahu and the Jews, the commanders that have made an error and I guess literally shot the humanitarian, the aid workers. Yeah.
And those aid workers had actually delivered food in Israel too. I mean, so they were clearly not targeted. They were not targeted. It was horrible. I mean, it's a war zone. It's a war zone. I mean, this is what happens in war zones. This is why wars are bad things. And this is why you don't, i.e. Hamas, you don't start them.
Yes.
That's simple and tragic.
Right. Take, for example, like when Israel does something that is a mistake, which to err is human, and it is war, and a mistake was made, they admit it. Even the prime minister comes on, and I just really appreciate that about him. Then you take what happened when the Islamic people,
the armed forces admitted it right, almost.
Immediately.
There was some investigation that had to take place to confirm. I think it was in fact a Hamas jihadist that they were targeting, and he eluded them, and a mistake was made, and these aid workers were killed. And there is a long history, right? Certainly through this campaign. Look at how many of them were concentrated in hospitals. I mean, as a physician, I mean that is the lowest of the low. To use hospitals,
real scumbags,
as military headquarters and operation centers. But yeah, your point is well taken. In a largely open society, not a totalitarian, theocratic thugocracy, these issues are brought to the fore and discussed, and there's a mea culpa for them. There's nothing like that. I mean, the absolute barbarity that we saw on display, the atrocities that were committed on October 7th, were put out on social media and celebrated. And bodies were paraded in the streets of Gaza. Bodies of women that had not only been killed but raped. I mean, it takes a moron and a mental cretin to not see the difference.
Yes,
a moron and a moral cretin, I should say, to not see the difference.
Yes. And when you see those atrocities and the children that were killed, and I went to Nashville recently, and there was an Israeli group there that were showing the videos of the atrocities that took place. They had about 10 to 12 short videos, and I could only get through 4, and I couldn't take it anymore. They said there was worse. Yeah.
I mean, even the Nazis at a certain level tried to conceal some of their crimes.
Yeah.
This was celebrated. This was celebrated.
Just horrendous.
And it's got to be part and parcel of this nonstop inculcation of hatred. Now, some of it goes beyond the text. You can't attribute all of this to the texts, but that provides an unfortunately fertile ground to then expand beyond them and get into just absolute raw barbarity. When you have math lessons which teach, if you start out with 10 Jews and you kill 4 of them, how many you got left? I mean, it's like, this is what you're teaching to children.
Yeah. And it is just a teaching of the hatred from when they're born. And I think that that's the concern that I see with even those that have come here. They just cannot recognize terrorism against Jews. It seems to be that's not terrorism. Whoever did it against the Jews, they can't seem to cognitively understand that's evil.
Right. Well, 58%, there was a signal poll in the United States. It was about, I think the sample was about 2,000. It was in a couple of weeks, couple to 3 weeks after October 7th. and they oversampled Muslims in the United States, and 58% of them felt that the October 7th attacks were justified. I mean, that's a horrific number, and that's within a few
It's
weeks.
sad. Like that is so scary about society that they would
Well,
see
and then
that.
if you go back to the Middle East and North Africa, there was a survey done by a very respected, academic polling center in Doha, and they surveyed the 16 largest Arab Muslim countries. And the survey ran from the last week in December through the first week in January. So this December of last year, January of this year, 8,000 Arab Muslims were surveyed, and the academic group that did the survey said that represented, because it was a population-based sample, random sample. They said that represented 95% of the Arab Muslims in the Middle East and North Africa. But the total sample was 8,000. Obviously, it's a lot more than 8,000 Muslims. But the sample was done in a statistical sample to try and represent as best they could the entire region, essentially, or 95% of the population there. And on two basic questions, agreement with the attacks themselves and refusal to recognize Israel, the numbers were about 90%. So 90% both approved of the attacks, and 90% refused to recognize Israel's right to exist.
Wow.
I mean, that's after October 15th. I'm sorry, October 7th.
Right. Well, I don't know actually, if you view what the Bible has to say, but it's quite in keeping with prophetic utterances that the Jews will find themselves alone, and that, the world's not really going to support them, but that's when God shows up very powerfully on their behalf.
Oh, I have to have faith. I'm not a particularly pious Jew, but I have to have faith. There is a difference between daily practice and faith.
Well, Ezekiel 38 and 39, would that be considered part of Jewish writings? Forgive my ignorance, but I know the Torah's, I think it's the Pentateuch.
Your ignorance pales in comparison to mine. The only thing I can remember from Ezekiel is a verse that I often use to inscribe. It's 33:11. It says, "I have no pleasure in the death of the wicked, but that the wicked turn from his way and live." So that's about all that I remember from Ezekiel.
Very nice. I think that's good. Well, if you did want to read in Ezekiel 38 and 39 on one of your quiet moments, this is where really some of us, some of the people who study sort of New Testament, Old Testament, but say that 38 and 39 is really describing basically the Battle of Armageddon, and the prediction as that the Jews basically do come to a tremendous war, and that they stand alone, but God shows up for them. So I'll leave that with you for your own, it's really interesting. And so the Jews have always been protected. The blessing of Abraham is on those who bless Israel, and that's what I believe. As a Christian, our church, we prayed for the Jews every single Sunday. We invested in a kibbutz. We raised funds for a kibbutz. We had General Yehudai Levy, if I'm saying his name right. So this is back in the late 70s and 80s. I don't want to say that I was even, born then and all that, but anywho. So we would just really bless the Jews. We learned their songs, Hava, Nagila Hava, we would do this. And so I was raised to really understand what the Bible says in Genesis to Abraham: those who bless you, I will bless, and I will make you into a great nation. And then in our New Testament, it says the same thing. If you bless Israel, you will be blessed. And those who curse Israel shall be cursed. And I've looked around watching as some of my compadres who I thought were with me have been very denigrating of Israel. And I stand back and I say, I don't want anything to do with being anywhere near you because God is watching. And you do not curse Israel. And so I really stand with them. Let me ask you before I let you go, what do you see happening? Because this war doesn't appear to be subsiding. It looks like Iran is beginning to get into it. Biden and the Obama, backing have done terrible things to equip Iran to fund Hezbollah and whatnot. And so it seems to be, what do you see happening?
Oh, the only thing I can pray for is that first of all, is that Israel is not prevented from invading Rafah and really, to the greatest extent possible, destroying Hamas. You're not going to destroy the ideology, but you certainly can destroy the elite troops that are still around, unfortunately, and that somehow that will serve as a deterrent. Beyond that simple scenario, I don't want to predict, and I hope we can have a fair election and get rid of this horrific administration, and and then you'll see major deterrence. That's all I can pray for. I don't have any answers. I don't even have any conceptions.
Yes.
Beyond that. And I will say that what I find very inspiring, and I'm deeply grateful for, are Christians like you. You're far more numerous than Jews, and Israel is not going to survive without you. Frankly, there are too many stupid Jews, particularly in North America, United States and Canada. They're not particularly helpful. There's a cadre
I've met them.
Of various, yes, so have I. That's why I don't go to temple anymore, is because of them. But there are very strong, obviously there are very strong, remarkably courageous Jews in Israel. There are some in the diaspora, but it's not nearly enough. It's not nearly enough for the survival of the state. So I just coming from me, I am very grateful to the support that Christian communities give to Israel.
I really love that. And we do really love you. And we are standing with you 100%, and it shall not be shaken. And as far as we're concerned, Israel will survive every onslaught. There shall be mistakes everywhere, but Israel, we find them virtuous, and I just really appreciate them. And in honor of your if Ezekiel is what you would consider your word, as I'm looking, I'm like, I just got to read you like 5 verses, because I think this is the promise to Israel. Nothing terrible is going to happen. They shall never be wiped off. Never, ever, ever. So it starts in Ezekiel 38 that the word of the Lord came to me, son of man, set your face against Gog and Magog. Some people say, so it's referring to lands that are in the north, and that could be Turkey. Some people have different, thoughts about, yeah.
Iran, maybe? I don't know.
Yes. Why not, right? In the north. So then what happens is you go through, there's a big battle through 38. Definitely God is saying that, my people have turned away from me. But because of God's great love, he's going to, and because of his commitment and his covenant with Israel, that he will not break it. So it talks about 7 months. It talks about all kinds of things happening. But in the end, so this is kind of the close of this war that happens, that many believe this is for a time to come. This is perhaps a big thing that kind of brings close to the end when the Messiah shall return. And I believe that Jews are awaiting that to the Mount of Olives, where we believe that he will show up. But in any case, Ezekiel 39:25 says, therefore, this is what the sovereign Lord says. I will now restore the fortunes of Jacob, and I will have compassion on all the people of Israel, and I will be zealous for my holy name. They will not forget their shame. They will forget their shame and the unfaithfulness that they showed toward me when they lived in safety in their land with no one to make them afraid. When I have brought them back from the nations and have gathered them from the countries of their enemies, I will be proved holy through them in the sight of many nations. Then they will know that I am the Lord their God. For though I sent them into exile among the nations, I will gather them to their own land, not leaving any behind. I will no longer hide my face from them, for I will pour out my spirit on the people of Israel, declares the sovereign Lord. And we believe that that is yet to come. And so, because that is talking about a very specific thing, the Jews miraculously returning to their land. And of course, that's been happening since, before 1968, 1948, and ever since then. They've just kept returning. No matter what happens, the Jews come back. And so, anyways, I leave you with that. And I've been very blessed by your books. We'll let everyone know that they can actually get your books. I do have, I think on your website, it does point everyone to Iran's Final Solution. And I do have that up on the share for Israel.
Yeah. All the books are available at Amazon under my name. That's the simplest way to get them. There are some links at my website, but you can just go directly to Amazon.
Right. And your website, for everyone who's asking, is Andrew Bostom, with an M at the end, everyone, bostom.org. And
right.
So thank you for your incredible knowledge and willing to share some of your thoughts with us and your incredible work that you've done writing books and understanding, the balance, the structure, and the differences between, Islam and what you are currently living. So we honor that. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Laura. God bless.
God bless. Just fascinating. Gog and Magog, very interesting terms in Ezekiel 38. There's no lands that are called Gog and Magog. So back in the day, they came up with that. And you can find a lot of teachings online about, like in YouTube, everywhere, about some of the end time prophecies, the fulfillment of Daniel, Ezekiel, Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, all of them alluding in many cases to end times and what it means. And one of the best things, I believe it's in Amos, but it does say that in the last days, the mountain of the Lord will be exalted among all the other mountains. So we rely on the name of the living God, and there is no other name under heaven by which men can be saved, we believe as Christians. And we believe that this God that came to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and was the God of Adam and Eve, this God had such a redemptive plan, and we walk in that, and we honor and we bless Israel, because those who bless Israel shall be blessed. And I get a lot of people. I had this morning emails from a fellow who regularly writes me. He's quite irate with me. And his whole thing was that he said, he sent me an article about how they're trying to ban Christianity and make it illegal to proselytize in Israel. So I read the article, and it's two sort of extremist aspects in the Netanyahu government. And I said, so there's extremists in his government. So name me a government party that doesn't have extremists. Name me a country that doesn't have extremists. Like, what is your point? I know Netanyahu does not want to ban Christianity. He loves Christians. He's very kind, has opened the doors to Christians. So what is your point about that? Like, just complete blindness, like utter anti-Semitism, just hating, everyone and anything to do with this. And so basically siding with the people who've done this terror and who believe in this Islamic way of, standing together even with terrorists. And I really, if anyone's listening to me right now and you follow the Muslim faith, my question to you and my challenge to you would be to see that you have to call out terrorism when it's terrorism. Otherwise, you're siding with the sociopaths and psychopaths of October 7th. It's just not acceptable. And many people will say, well, you know, look what's happening right now in Gaza and all of that. Well, this is war, you know, this is war. This is, that's a different thing. That's a different thing than what just, you know, invading a peaceful country on a day like October 7th, right? There was peace October 6th, and then this war. And so I don't know who is thinking that Israel can survive without going after these horrific people, these Hamas, you know, animals that came in, did heinous crimes. How do you, if you were an Israeli, what would you think would be the right thing to do in order to ever be able to live with peace, but to eradicate these sickos? You have to. Hezbollah is no different. These are radical terrorist factions that are hell-bent on the destruction of one people. So Israel was there 3,000 years ago when David was king. So how can anyone call them in Jerusalem? That's where Israel is. It's even only kind of part of Jerusalem now. Israel's land, actually, if you look at the land, is much bigger than they have right now, and they just have this little strip. Leave them alone. What is the problem here? This is a religious war spurned by the spawn of Satan. This is a religious war to harm one people. Very interesting. So let's look at just a little bit about Canada before I let you all go. So former Liberal MP Han Dong claimed to know nothing about foreign election interference. So let me just see. I'm supposed to read this. Okay, after previously claiming he knew nothing about Beijing's election interference in support of him, MP Han Dong is now admitting students from a private high school voted in the 2019 nomination. He believes the students were from China, not Canada. He encouraged students there to support his candidacy. His campaign organized 2 buses to win the nomination. And that is what's going on. A lot of places, they just bring people in and they're not legally allowed to vote. And so this has put a difficult thing onto the Liberal Party, but this has happened in every party. Let's not kid ourselves. Han Dong was advising Beijing on the 2 Michaels treatment and how it would affect Liberal election fortunes. So, do we have a video on that, JT, or that's just, okay, so Han Dong advised Beijing on political impact. So basically he was saying, don't bring the 2 Michaels back now. It could look, it wouldn't be helpful to the Liberal Party. While you have 2 Michaels that are, being held illegally over in China. So former CPC leader Aaron O'Toole testifies about foreign interference and how it affected Conservatives' seat totals.
We went from winning the seat count a week before the election with a small, modest minority to, on election day, losing the seat count and still winning the popular vote. We saw the vote changing largely on the vaccine and the vaccine mandate issue. But on election night, when we knew we were going to lose, my campaign manager had said, our models and how the vote goes, you should end up with about 127, 128 seats, which will be a historic level for opposition. And when you consider it was a pandemic election, we were largely on the wrong side of public opinion on the vaccine mandate issue, which is, in my view, why the Prime Minister called the election. That was being briefed to me to say, calm down, you did okay. You'll be able to live to fight another day and stay on as leader. So I went in that night feeling, okay, we're going to end up with 127, 128 seats. And as returns were coming in that night, not that I asked for any detail, but that night there was already clear indication that a number of ridings were vastly outside of our modeling window, and the ridings were the same ridings that we had been complaining about with respect to foreign interference. We've never connected the two, and even months after, when I spoke about ranges, I always used to say, you know, between 5 and 9, 6 and 9. I would never be precise, but
sorry, in terms of 5 and 9, in terms of what?
5 to 9 seats that I think were possibly changed as a result of foreign interference. Narrower margin seats where we had large numbers of people not voting and suspicions about voter suppression in those specific seats. Certainly nowhere near enough to change the results of the election, but for people in those seats, if they were undergoing intimidation or suppression measures, their democratic rights were being trampled on by foreign actors.
Absolutely fascinating. So let's play another little clip, right? And then we're going to talk about this because we posted this on my Twitter just before the show to get some understanding. We were unclear where Aaron O'Toole and the CPC, because from what we remember as people who stood, we didn't feel any support coming from the CPC. So anywho, let's look at this clip. Aaron O'Toole.
When you consider it was a pandemic election, we were largely on the wrong side of public opinion on the vaccine mandate issue, which is, in my view, why the Prime Minister called the election.
Okay, so we don't understand that. Can you play that one more time? Listen to it. Listen to this carefully. Okay. Calling an audible. All right.
And when you consider it was a pandemic election, we were largely on the wrong side of public opinion on the vaccine mandate issue, which is, in my view, why the Prime Minister called the election.
So we were largely on the wrong side of public opinion. So do my share here, JT. So JT and I put up on my trusty little Twitter account, X, we call it now. And we said, can someone please tell me what Aaron O'Toole means by this comment? He seems to indicate that the CPC HQ were against the vaccine mandates. Because is that what you're hearing? He's saying we were largely against, we were on the wrong side of public opinion.
And that's why Trudeau called the election.
And that's why Trudeau called the election. Because they wanted, okay. So we put this up saying, hey, does anyone, perhaps I'm wrong, you know, it seems like he's saying that they were against the vaccine mandates. I don't recall them being opposed to the mandates. Do you? Do you recall the Conservative Party of Canada being opposed to the mandates? Or do you recall crickets? Because I recall crickets. I was looking for support. So here's what some of y'all said. Okay. Let's see. So some of you said this. So Darlene Perry, she said Poilievre-backed anti-COVID-19 vaccine mandate bill fails to pass House. So he was anti-vaccine mandate, but this was 6 or 7 months ago. This was not in 2020 or 2021, I guess. When was that last election? It was 2020, I think. Yeah. So Bernier was all for the shots, mandates, and masks. No, no, I know that you're very wrong on that one, Lily. Sorry. Someone's telling you he was all for locking down grandma and vax passes. Love the mask around his neck. No. He was not. He never got vaccinated. He opposed it. He went to rallies outside. He got arrested. He was not for the vaccine mandates. He was on the wrong side of public opinion. Yes, the CPC, were for it. The public was against it. That's my view.
How confusing
See
it is.
how confusing it is? Like, we kind of see what you're saying, Val-Ann. So why were they applauding Pierre Poilievre when he was demanding more vaccines faster? I know. I remember that. that happened. Where's the vaccines? You're not getting us enough vaccines, Liberal Party. I remember this well. The CPC were collaborators in crimes against humanity. Oh, how we would have loved to have had elected officials speaking out for us. Exactly. He definitely was all for it, I remember. They did not discuss this in the HOC. They could easily have asked for debates on safety and efficacy. They played the silent card. Yes, see, you're sort of going along with what I remember. It was really silence. It was crickets. And that's, I think, the biggest part of why, remember, this is still the party of Steve Harper. Hated until we found someone new to hate. They definitely pushed the mandates, Space Monkey says. O'Toole supported the vaccine but didn't support the mandates. He was right about being on the wrong side of the issue at the time, but it's only because he failed to make the case. But the right side of history, says John Gotti. It just doesn't, John Gotti, isn't that like the
He's John Gaddy.
yeah, Gaddy.
Gaddy.
But he's not like John Gotti. It just didn't fit your narrative, so you never watched HOC or bothered to find out. That's how lying PPC play it. Oh, straw men and red herrings galore. No, not true. Did watch, never saw any real support against the mandates coming out. I didn't see it. He demonstrated he is a globalist liberal after he won the leadership of the Conservative Party. O'Toole was an obvious fraud from day one. It's too bad Derek Sloan didn't win that leadership race. Then again, a bunch of ballots just got destroyed in the counting process. All right. Well, interesting. If you want to read more about this, there's a lot here. CPC was against. Here you go. Vaccine mandates where the parties stand on the campaign wedge issue. Okay. So basically saying, I think that is like that's a CTV News. Well, here, I'll just push that. Vaccine mandates where the parties stand on the campaign wedge. This is August 16th, 2021. And is it easy to see? Conservatives. After dodging questions about how a conservative government would approach the vaccine mandate, yes, the dodge I remember, right? Issue for federal workers. Late on Sunday night, O'Toole's office issued a statement announcing that if elected, the Conservatives would take an alternative approach to mandatory vaccines. An alternative approach, okay. So all that to say, yeah, very interesting. We just thought that was such an interesting way. Dodging. The CPC dodging very important cultural and right side of the topic issues. We should be on the right side. We should say so. We should stand up, and we should have the government that supports the right of the people speaking loudly on it, which was not happening. A lot of dodge going on. Okay. So, former CPC MP Kenny Chiu tells the Foreign Interference Commission on what happened with the spying scandal at the Winnipeg lab. This is good.
Well, it was during the pandemic, and I remember it was just months before that, before the Parliament rose. We started the discussion and the trying to find fact-finding on the Winnipeg National Microbiology Lab, what happened, under what circumstances the scientists were dismissed, their security clearance removed. And there were a lot of talk about anti-Asian racism, even coming from the government MPs and even the prime ministers in response to our questioning. And as I explained to you, Madam Commissioner, I have a very high regard of Canada's democracy. And it was a very disillusioned moment when I see that the Parliament of Canada had asked 4 times for documents for the National Microbiology Lab situations, and the government keep on ignoring it and even took the Parliament, represented by the Speaker, to court. And then when that didn't work, the government decided, or the governing party decided to pull the plug and call an election on that in the midst of COVID-19 pandemic that we are suffering. So it was a very chaotic moment. It was also a very polarized moment.
So absolutely fascinating that anything and any understanding sometimes of what's going on in corruption, like we have a show, I think airing Friday, with corruption in Chestermere. And that's in Alberta. What's wrong with our nation when something is clearly going wrong and everyone is hiding and there's accounts nobody can see and there's no accountability, there's no transparency, and evil is allowed to go unchecked in Canada? That's a big problem that we're dealing with. Okay, Mocha Bazirgan, yeah, on scene at the tax protest in Alberta with heavily armed police officers. So this is the carbon tax.
With the police involvement here at this level, this could elicit an even bigger response like what we saw at Milk River. Is that what they want? I think they all need to call in sick, take COVID tests, and shut her down and say, I can't make it into work today.
Did you used to have faith in police?
Not really, but now it's really bad because they have tarnished the badge. Like I have no respect for them anymore. They should have stood down in Ottawa, but they didn't. So right now what they're doing, they're working for their corporation instead of taking care of we the people. So they're not taking care of us. They're ready to pounce on us anytime, and that's very sad.
They have hundreds of officers, and some of them have automatic weapons.
Just, what are they going to do? You know, they've got too many people down here that just elicits a negative response, and it turns people against them, and then they wonder why. We saw what happened in Ottawa, we see what happened here, and we saw what happened in Coup, we saw what happened in Milk River. It's atrocious that this much money is being spent on this, and we've got as much rampant crime in these communities, and they won't do anything about it, but they'll stand arm in arm against civilians who are just exercising their God-given rights to actually protest the taxes, the carbon taxes, the cost of living, and we've had it.
The protest started yesterday and it's still going on the second day. When is it going to end?
Well, I've packed for 3 weeks. There's a few of us who have packed enough food for 3 weeks. There are some really nice people in the town close by in Cochrane that have volunteered to come and do our laundry for us. So we would like to stay here for as long as it takes to end the carbon tax.
Seems like the government is expecting this to evolve into Milk River, hence the huge police presence. But let me ask you this, is it time to kick our CMP out of Alberta?
Our CMP have no place in this province any longer, and that's what needs to happen here is the Alberta government needs to do a patch over and take the good RCMP officers that want to leave this force and become the provincial police force, and we'll leave the rest of these brethren behind. We'll call it a day, and Alberta will set the trail for how we're going to do policing in our own province, and it won't be beholden to Ottawa and the government in Ottawa that pushes these people out here.
Wow. Did you see those guns? They've got those, would you call that a semi-automatic gun? I don't know. I don't know the name of guns, but not a huge gun person, but I am getting one for hunting. They have huge guns and pretty shocking. Like we've had some other protests going on around the country, and I don't know if y'all remember that the police officers were bringing the pro-Palestinian groups coffee. Hey? Did you remember that? Yeah, giving them the bump. So here's the coffee, all good feelings. Say, oh, you know, settle down. But I think, isn't Trudeau saying that there is seeming to be some, wasn't there something about there being some sort of, violent, sort of growing sense of violence that was coming? I don't know. I thought that actually Trudeau was actually complaining about that. Let me look quickly across anything I can see. No, I can't see it. I don't know. I thought I read somewhere that there was, some concern about growing violence. Well, I mean, isn't it interesting? So here's true Canadians out there, again, with their Canadian flags, innocent as anything, right? Little grandmas, moms, kids, right? Standing up for their country, going against the carbon tax, which makes perfect sense, which Alberta is against the carbon tax, even as far as Premier Danielle Smith. And you've got all of these police showing up like, we're tougher than you. And with the big guns, like, oh, yeah, I don't know. Don't people have the wrong end of the stick sometimes? What would happen if we stood together as a people? We pay your taxes, police officers. You want the carbon tax? Do you? You think it's right, fair, just? But I guess they're keeping their jobs, right? Their boss is telling them to show up, right, JT? It's not as if they can just go, oh, I'm not going into work today. Oh, and the guy says, take a COVID test, which will come back positive. They all do. Take a COVID test, everyone. Stay home. Unbelievable. Okay, my website's Laura-Lynn.tv. Thank you very much for joining us today. We had some fun. And I appreciate that we get to talk about some of the most interesting things that are going on the globe. And we get to talk about it and see it through a lens that is biblical. So at the donate button there on my website, Laura-Lynn.tv, will take you to the donate button. And, we need to get one of those things on the screen, JT, because people can just hold their phone up and go to it. And no, that is not the mark of the beast. That is called a QR code. It is not the mark. When it's the mark of the beast, we'll let you know, and let's not take it, okay? But to all of you who get all worried, oh, you're using QR codes. Yeah, and I use GPS. Yes, I do. I so far have not ascribed to TikTok, all right? And I'm standing strong against that. I don't know. I see lots of people on TikTok, and like even Christians say they get their best news from TikTok. And I'm like, I don't know if I want to be on TikTok. They'll track and trace me there. And I'm like, what do you think that Facebook is doing? They're tracking and tracing. They've got all the outline of my face. They can even, title my name under my picture and someone else's post from across the country. That's how well Facebook has our faces already tracked. It's done. It's done. If the police ever looking for me and they say, does anyone have a picture of Laura-Lynn? We're going to go arrest her for Lord only knows what, hate speech or whatever. They're going to go to Facebook, and Facebook's going to just hand over my likeness, and they'll be able to track me from wherever, miles away. Yeah, there she is right in the middle of the mall. That's where they'll find me. So the QR code, yeah, we could get that up. But when you help us, we get to do this, and we get to do it with strength and not worried about, our next meal or anything like that. And for those of you who might say that you will support us for $20 a month or more, we're going to send you my book. Did you know I had a book? My book is called Relentless Redemption, and it's on my story. It basically, the story begins it begins from when I'm born, but it's not much about that. This goes way back into the late 80s and 90s and up through a series of years that were very, very difficult for me. And it talks about God's relentless redemption in my life. So if you would join us for $20 or more per month, that would be amazing. We will send you the book. And if, for some of you who've been longtime supporters, monthly supporters, and you'd like a book, just let me know. Or if you throw funds our way once in a while, we'll also send you a book. Just inquire about it and we will do that. Okay, right now it's just a special promo. We also want to let you know that you can donate anonymously. You can do a one-time gift, large or small. We appreciate every bit of it. It helps us so incredibly. And if you like sending e-transfers, you can go to Laura-Lynn Live at pm.me. Laura-Lynn Live at pm.me, and that will get to my email, lauralynlive at protonmail.com. They've shortened it. That's pretty cool. Also, snail mail, box 48184, Queensboro, New Westminster, V3M0A7. Thank you. It means so much to us. It really does. Considering the times that we are in, have you been watching some of these? I listened to an economic forecast. So gold has gone up 10 to 12% in this last year. It's been about a year. We've been really saying what you should do, and gold is going up. And I'm so happy that we've been promoting that, because that means you've made money. And we just don't think that we should leave money in the bank on paper that is photocopied, and then they go into debt even more in our country, paying for all kinds of crazy stuff. I think that there's been several promises even in the last few days of where Trudeau's pre-budget pledges, 15 billion to top up here. Do you see this? Share, JT. Trudeau's latest pre-budget pledge, 15 billion top up to apartment construction loan program. Wasn't yesterday, it was a 6 billion for housing, but it had ties, it had strings attached or something like that. So all kinds of crazy stuff. He is just spending so much money everywhere and every time you turn around. So if you want to get some gold and silver, we recommend Sun City Silver, and talk to Steve Merrill there. He is true blue. We love him. And when you order silver, it comes in a package, and it comes right to your home. And then you decide where you want to bury it or hide it, but it's in your grubby little hands, and it's not in a bank that can suddenly close. And I heard just recently that someone says, so I'm just going to carefully say this, that they know that it looks like there's something about another bank going down. So as soon as we know anything that we can report, we will. But rumors and all of this kind of thing. And the reason is because this country has not been handled correctly. I want to leave you today with something. It's Proverbs 3. And you know that in Proverbs there's 31 chapters. So generally every single month you could read Proverbs every day, one proverb. It would take you 3 minutes, and you could give yourself such wisdom. Solomon wrote Proverbs, and he was said to be the wisest man who ever lived. The wisest. His dad was David, who was full of so much wisdom, writing all the Psalms and, involved as a key character in Kings and Chronicles and Samuel. But it was his son, Solomon, who wrote and crafted Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Solomon. Song of Solomon's the sex book, by the way, and we will not be reading that here on this show, okay? That is not happening. All right, I want to start Proverbs 3, verse 9. Honor the Lord with your wealth, with the first fruits of all your crops. Then your barns will be filled to overflowing, and your vats will brim over with new wine. I wonder, what does that mean, to honor the Lord with your wealth and the first fruits of your crops? Well, if you look over in Malachi, it basically says to give a tithe to the Lord. And in fact, it's the only time in Scripture where God says that your treasure, it shows where your heart is. So that's why God wants you to honor him by showing him that this money, this wealth that you've given me, that is not my treasure. My treasure is you. My treasure is God. And so out of the treasure here on earth, we honor God with the first fruits, with a tithe, We bless the church that you go to. If you go to a church, you should give them 10%. That's what the word says. And then offerings are besides. And this is the only place in Scripture where Malachi says, prove me now herewith, if I will not open the windows of heaven and pour out such a blessing that you can scarce contain it. That's what God promises, that if you will trust Him with your finances, you will be blessed. And I have proven this over and over in my life. When I'm been a faithful tither, I believe in blessing others. I believe in blessing the church. I believe in blessing the ministries that are blessing me. And even though, you know, tax receipts are great and all of that, and you always get money back at the end of the year, and that's part of the blessing, and we offer a tax receipt, but it's not really for that. It's just that when you give of your finances to where you are being spiritually fed, you receive a blessing. God opens the windows of heaven. Now tell me, how much treasure do you think God has in His hands? How much treasure do you think is in heaven? I think it's a lot. I do. And when we trust Him with our tiny little bit, it's like saying, God, I'm not putting any of my hope in these funds. I'm putting my hope in You, who owns the cattle on 1,000 hills, who owns all of the funds and monies, who is fully able to bring funds, support, and sustenance my way. I am trusting You with my little bit of treasure. That's when you see God's blessing. Thanks for watching, everyone. See you soon. You know, it's not easy to deliver the truth of what our sick world is doing, but for some of us, we feel that we have no choice. Because if we are silent about these abominable things, then we are letting evil go unchecked, and we cannot do that. For those of you wonderful people who are writing me and are sharing your encouragement, I am deeply grateful. Thank you for all the letters that you've been sending. Thank you for the donations and the support. I found out that in order to speak the truth, you have to become very, very strong. If you would go to my website at www.laura-lynn.tv, you'll find all of the ways that you can contact me. Remember, my friends, all is well. All is well. Thanks for joining me.